We're about to go into the psychiatric history of Mr. Dahmer, and as I've told you that the jury is more than familiar with the facts, and your report indicates some brevity with regard to the facts, so we're going to ask you to read that. But before we do that, did you have occasion to talk to the natural mother and father of the defendant?
Yes, I did.
Was that telephonically?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And you asked some questions that you thought were pertinent?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Would you tell us the psychiatric history you took from Mr. Dahmer?
Yes, I will. Mr. Dahmer is a 31-year-old white male with a long history of serious mental illness, which was essentially untreated. He described his experience of growing up in a household with tremendous conflicts between his parents and little affection. He said that this resulted in ongoing feelings of insecurity, anxiety, and depression. He reported feeling as if he was a disappointment to his father, an analytical chemist, because he did poorly in math. He denied any physical or sexual abuse while growing up. He describes himself as having few friends and living an increasingly lonely private existence. He can only remember being attracted to males, which consisted of initial solitary masturbatory experiences while fantasizing up until his mid-20s. Following this, his sexual experience consisted of non-consenting sex with drugged males, anonymous sex in bookstores or bathhouses, and sexual experiences with dead bodies, those of which he had killed. He cannot recall...
Wait. Go ahead, Doctor.
He cannot recall ever having an ongoing, mutually consenting relationship in his entire life. As an early adolescent, he developed a morbid preoccupation with what he referred to as road kills.
Same?
Yes.
He told you he used the word morbid?
He used the word road kills.
Morbid curiosity is your word.
Yes, it is.
Would you make sure that when it's his words, you fix the parentheses?
Yes, I will.
Quotes.
And would drag these animals killed by cars into the woods near his home in Bath, Ohio, open them up, and look at their insides. Once he defleshed a large dog and bleached its bones and skull. Another time he defleshed a beagle's head and impaled it on a pole. He described it as, quote, a stupid prank, end quote. Following an unprovoked attack by older boys where he was hit on the head with a billy club, he first recalled persistent homicidal and sexual fantasies. This was at age 15. He developed homicidal fantasies and plans towards a jogger who he found attractive. He saw no alternatives to this behavior when asked, stating he, quote, did not know how to meet him, end quote. This type of fantasy persisted and culminating in killing a hitchhiker, Stephen Hicks, when he was 18. He recalled dismembering the body and masturbating while looking at the internal organs and skull. He stated that he felt he had a choice regarding his behavior at this time and knew it was wrong. He stated that knowing he quote, could do what I wished, my parentheses, to the corpse, end parentheses, without worrying about rejection, I would have total control, added to the excitement and pleasure. When I asked...
That's a quick quote now.
That's it, yeah, quick quote. When I asked him, had he experienced rejection before, he stated, quote, no, that he had not approached anyone before and had not been rejected.
There's a quick quote.
Quit quote. He stated further that, quote, killing and doing what I wanted, end quote, was a solitary masturbatory fantasy for years. He said that he never talked to anyone about his homosexuality and did not feel it would be accepted by the family. He stated that, quote, from age 16 on, sexual thoughts took up a good part of his day, at least one half, end quote. He considered himself, quote, hypersexual, main focus of my life. It interfered with having a normal life, end quote.
What did he mean, or did you ask him to define hypersexual? What did you understand that word to mean?
I understood him to mean that he felt that the sexual thoughts took up more time than allowed him to get on with his life in other ways.
Talking about like a hyperactive?
Yeah.
Okay, continue on.
He had begun to abuse marijuana and alcohol in high school. Marijuana abuse ended after high school, but alcohol abuse persisted. He has met the DSM-3R criteria for alcohol dependence, and it interfered academically, occupationally, and socially to varying degrees over time. He stated that his feelings over his parents' divorce and feeling horrified about murdering Mr. Hicks resulted in increased drinking. He reported various attempts to resist his sexual thoughts and repetitive violent thoughts over the next 9 years. These included alcohol abstinence and sexual repression while at his grandmother's house in 1983 and 1984. Following this period, he was gradually less able to resist his desires. He recalled going to the wake of an 18-year-old stranger with the idea of digging up the body. He said, quote, I wanted a nice-looking guy without having to hurt anyone, end quote. He bought a shovel and returned to the grave 2 weeks later. Quote, I was going to dig him up, but it was winter. The ground was too hard. I wanted to enjoy the corpse sexually, viewing pictures, seeing what it looked like inside, end quote. He said that this way he would have, quote, total control without having...
Well, he didn't say total. He said he would have...
I'm sorry. He said that this way he would, quote, have control without having...
Is there some typewritten copy of this? I've got a hand-scratched note.
This is my report.
The other guy's got it. Go ahead. You know what page we're on? 6.
We're on 6
Yeah.
at the top.
I'm sorry, doctor. It says he said this way he would, quote, have control. That's where you were.
Yes. Quote, let's see. He said that this way he would, quote, have control without having to hurt anyone and not having to worry about anyone else's desires, end quote. During another attempt to displace his desires, he hid in a store in the Southridge Mall after hours and then stole an attractive male mannequin.
That's in quotes, attractive male mannequin.
Yes.
Did he say that?
Yes, he did.
Okay, continue on.
He brought it home and attempted to sexually satisfy himself with it.
Go ahead.
Following this period, he began to frequent bathhouses, bookstores, and gay bars, and would have casual sex, quote, one-night stands, end quote. He began to drug males in the baths to, quote, keep them there longer, avoid unwanted anal sex, and avoid rejection, end quote. He remembered taking Steve Toomey to the Ambassador Hotel, drinking and drugging him.
He named the kind of pills.
It's a hypnotic.
Go ahead.
And having some mutual, quote, light sex, quote, light sex, fall asleep, and woke up on top of him and he was dead. I had no intention of hurting him, end quote. He described, quote, absolute horror, knew I did it. After this...
That was a quick quote.
Yes.
Go ahead.
After this, he stated that, quote, the compulsion/drive was too strong, end quote. He had been trying to resist but quit after this. He stated that he, quote, did not get a thrill out of killing. I wanted it to be painless, not a hate crime, not a racial crime, not a sexual orientation hatred. 5 were straight male hustlers. Physique was the main thrust. No malice towards any of them," end quote. He described the planning of the killings, which he knew were wrong. He attempted to conceal the crimes by either disposing of or concealing the bodies, although this clearly became more disorganized over time.
Now, when you talk about, you use the word disorganized over time, what do you mean by that word disorganized?
The frequency increased and the bodies were piling up. He was turning his apartment into a morgue.
Continue.
After the 5th killing, he began to experience various bizarre beliefs which influenced his behavior. One of which was that of making a, quote, temple, end quote, or, quote, power center, end quote, with skeletons and skulls, hoping it would be, quote, be a means to get in contact with spirits that would aid me in getting power, to magically give me abilities and talents that I did not have, end quote. One power he mentioned was, quote, financial, make me more money, end quote, such as in, quote, real estate investments, end quote. I asked him if he ever thought of conventional ways of studying real estate, like taking a course, and he stated that he, quote, never did, end quote. He thought money made in this way would allow him to, quote, move to a warmer climate like Florida, end quote. He also stated that the power center would give him, quote, social abilities to control others without having to go to extremes, end quote. He denied being involved in any cult groups. He had in the past bought the Satanic Bible and, quote, read it and threw it out. He stated that...
Hold on a second. Go ahead, Doctor.
He denied being involved in any cult groups.
I'm sorry, I think he stated that these ideas were his own.
Yes. He
Now,
stated that these ideas were his own. He also stated that he tried to create zombies.
Go ahead.
While four of his last 7 victims were unconscious, he described drilling small holes through their skulls, then inserting a metal syringe and injecting weak acid or boiling water 3 inches into their frontal lobes. Quote, I wanted to induce a permanent zombie-like state, to make them pliable, obey my wishes, so they would be permanently with me and compliant, so they would never leave my apartment, so I would not get caught. I wanted them coherent to follow commands, but not coherent to have their own thought processes. If they had their own thought processes, they might remember that they had to leave or lived somewhere else. Thought it would work, but it never did. The ideas came from within. I wanted just one, in my parentheses, zombie, end quote. He also described cannibalizing 2 of his victims and the excitement that they were now a permanent part of him. He reported that starting with Raymond Smith, he photographed his victims to remember what they looked like for masturbation purposes. Later, he remembered photographing, quote, to remember what the internal parts looked like, end quote. He described becoming more interested in the insides again. The colors always, that's a quote, the colors always amazed me. I never showed the photographs to anyone. End quote. He described the entire process as, quote, becoming less satisfying. Wish I had just stopped. It seemed like I could not, end quote. He denied symptoms consistent with antisocial personality disorder or sexual sadism.
Stop there. How are you able to conclude, based upon what you knew in your conversations with Mr. Dahmer that he denied symptoms consistent with antisocial personality disorder. How do you come about concluding that?
Well, you look at various things. First of all, you don't just look at what he says. You look at partly what he says about, does he meet the criteria? You know, you ask him about symptoms and he says, yes, I did this, or yes, I had this, no, I didn't have this. But you also look at collateral history. You talk to parents. You read accounts of what other people have said.
So when you say he denied symptoms, what you're saying is you asked him a lot of questions, he gave you the answers, and this, in effect, means that he wasn't antisocial in your opinion.
That's correct.
So when you say he denied symptoms, he isn't denying them at all. He's answering your questions that lead you to conclude that.
That's correct.
Okay. How about sexual sadism? What is sexual sadism?
That is that's a paraphilia where you derive pleasure by torturing others. The pleasure is in the actual torturing.
Now, why can't he be classified as a sexual sadist?
Well, there's nothing to suggest that from anything he said or any of the accounts that I've read that he has stated or they have stated that there was pleasure being derived in hurting. He in fact stated that that was the least pleasant part, that he often had to have a drink to overcome that part of the inhibition.
Does a sexual sadist want a conscious or an unconscious person?
That would be generally conscious.
Okay, so the sexual sadist wants to see how it's affecting a
Yes.
Do you know of any reason to not believe the fact that when he did the things that he did, that these people were unconscious?
They were unconscious most of the time. I know that in one case he did strike someone on the head with a mallet in an attempt not to derive pleasure from that, but to render them unconscious.
Okay. Continue on, please.
He denied auditory or other hallucinations. He denied symptoms consistent with major depression or manic depression.
All right, now when you say that, what you're doing, once again, is saying, I'm trying to put this fella in a category, I'm asking him a lot of questions, and
Yes.
he's not responding to me that would lead me to believe he could be put into that category.
That's correct.
Okay.
Prodromal or residual symptoms of schizophrenia are present, and this disorder could not be ruled out.
Okay, now translate that for us. What does
Well,
that mean?
he does not meet the criteria for schizophrenia in terms of having a definite period of continuous hallucinations or very delusional, disturbed behavior.
That would have to be there for one to be able to conclude that.
That's correct.
But when you use the word prodromal or residual symptoms of schizophrenia, what are you, and you say they are present, what are you saying?
That there were 6 symptoms that I focused on. One was there was marked social isolation or withdrawal. That is from what he says in almost every account that I've read. Impairment in role functioning as a wage earner or a student. He had a decline in his high school years in functioning and then dropped out completely in his first year of college. That's a typical time when a schizophrenic episode occurs, when first leaving home or early parts of college. He did function for long periods of time in a job. However, the job was eventually lost due to deterioration in work functioning. He had markedly peculiar behavior. Some examples of that were wearing these yellow contacts around socially, staring inside the bodies of dead animals when he was a kid. He has blunted affect. Almost all the mental health professionals that evaluate him do notice a blunted or constricted affect.
What does that mean?
That means he doesn't respond with the full range of emotion. It's toned down, it's restricted, it's flattened, it's bland.
Okay, go ahead.
Odd beliefs or magical thinking which influence behavior. These would be related to beliefs regarding his attempts to make a power center.
Okay.
He had odd beliefs about ingesting bodies and them becoming part of him. He had some magical thinking that there was forces in the environment that were controlling the situation so as to protect him from ever being caught.
So what you're saying is that it can't be ruled out, but you're not making a diagnosis
That's
that he
correct.
was one.
He has some symptoms.
Okay,
Okay.
good. Continue on, please, Doctor. He reported several exhibitionist acts. On
He
page-
reported several exhibitionist acts and one episode of taking pictures of a minor with alleged fondling of his penis. He had 2 arrests for drunken disorderly conduct in 1981 and 1982, 1 arrest for disorderly conduct in 1983, and 1 shoplifting arrest in 1983. He denied robbery as a motive in any of the crimes with which he is charged. He denied symptoms consistent with any sexual disorder except necrophilia. He reported symptoms consistent with schizotypal and borderline personality disorders and psychotic disorder not otherwise specified. He received court-ordered counseling after being charged with exposing himself by Evelyn A. Rosen, Ph.D., from February 23, 1987 to March 7, 1988. There is speculation in the notes that he never gained anything from this outpatient treatment and never really made a serious commitment to it. He is never reported to have been an inpatient in a mental hospital.
Did you do a medical history?
Yes, I did.
What is it, please?
He had no apparent acute or chronic illnesses. He was receiving a medication, which is basically an antihistamine for a skin reaction from bug bites. He has
Go ahead.
He has a history of head injuries. While walking on the street at age 14, he reports being hit with a billy club in the neck by an older group of boys, from which he recovered with no loss of consciousness. Second episode, he was hit in the head at age 26 with approximately a 1-hour loss of consciousness, kicked in the ribs. He required sutures to close the head wound. This followed his being robbed. And a history of seizures was denied.
What would that indicate to you? The history of seizures might cause you to figure out that there was something organically wrong?
Yes,
So you have none of that here.
we don't have any evidence.
All right, the next section of your report is family social history, and I had indicated to you that the jury really has had that expressed to them, and that yours is so consistent with what the other doctors said about where he was born and what age he moved and where he went to high school, when he went in the Army, Ohio State. So I'm going to ask you to just skip that.
Okay,
I would like you to go to the mental status examination, please.
all right. Mr. Dahmer presents to the examination room on each occasion accompanied by correctional personnel. He is dressed in jail clothing and appears neatly groomed with a several-day growth of beard. He is oriented to person, place, time, and situation. His mood is depressed. His affect is generally bland and appropriate to his mood. His thought content is positive for suicidal thoughts without an active plan. He states, quote, "If I had my way, I would prefer to overdose with an anesthetic like animals at a shelter," end quote. He denies homicidal ideas or plans. He reported some intrusive images of the victims, which he described as unpleasant. He reports occasional sexual thoughts, which he, quote, tries to block out, end quote. He is not unrealistically anxious and expresses no current delusions, paranoid, or bizarre ideas. His thought process is generally logical and understandable at the time of the interview. He denies hallucinations in any of the 5 sensory spheres. There is no evidence of any problems with his speech, and there are no psychomotor deficits in terms of abnormal movements, agitation, or retardation. His intellect appears grossly intact in all spheres. His short-term memory is good. His long-term memory appears intact, although he describes past periods of blackouts when drinking. He is able to describe expected socially appropriate behavior in hypothetical situations. His concentration and attention are good. His insight into his illness is poor. He denied taking any medication which might affect the mental status examination or the interviews in general. His mental state appeared generally stable throughout the interviews. On 12/26/91, I observed a scratch across his left wrist, which he stated he did with a plastic spoon, which eased his frustration. On 1/1/92, he was more agitated after being told he could no longer have pens. He reported that he made a suicidal threat after being upset over a cell search. On 1/4/92, he appeared more fatigued than usual.
Did you review any of the psychological examinations that were taken by Mr. Dahmer that were reported to you?
Yes. Mr. Dahmer was examined by Kenneth H. Smale, Ph.D., clinical psychologist, on 7/28/91 and 8/10/91. His report has been reviewed and relied on me in part, informing my opinions on this matter. He reports administering a battery of psychological tests consisting of the MMPI-2, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale revised, and the Rorschach.
Can you tell us what kind of tests these are? Are these tests that are normally taken by psychologists in the course of clinical psychological profiling of a person?
Yeah, every psychologist decides which tests are important in their own battery to come up with hypotheses about mental illness.
And after the tests are taken, are they tests that you can look at and read and draw your own conclusions, or are you limited to the reading of them by the person who gives them?
The psychologist is the expert in the interpretation and administration of psychological tests, and psychiatrists would ordinarily, if they felt that it was useful in a particular case, would call on a psychologist to do psychological testing and make an interpretation.
Can you read psychological tests?
That's not my expertise.
I didn't ask you that. Can you read them? You're a psychologist, you got it.
Well, I'm not a licensed psychologist. Okay. I don't read psychological tests.
Okay, fine, that's great. Tell us what this, what are these the 3 kind of tests that if you were asking a psychologist to give them, you'd ask for?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Would you ask a psychologist to do these kind of tests on Mr. Dahmer?
These tests are important because the MMPI is a broad screening test for mental illness. It's a standardized type of test. It's just been revised to the MMPI-2, which is the upgrade from the MMPI-1.
And that's what he was given?
Yes.
Okay.
The Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale is an IQ test. That lets us know at approximately what IQ level is Mr. Dahmer functioning. Is he retarded? Is he borderline intelligence? Or is he in the normal range? The Rorschach test is the ink blot test and can be scored both subjectively by interpreting the responses, and there is also an objective way to score them called the Exner scoring system.
All right, tell us when these tests were administered by Dr. Smale.
7/28/91 and 8/10/91.
Within what period of time after his arrest?
These were done within 6 weeks of the arrest.
Was there a conclusion given to you for your review?
Yes.
Tell us what it was.
Dr. Smale concluded that in regard to his IQ tests, all scores remain within the normal range.
What does that mean to you?
That means, based on his testing, that he has a normal IQ.
Okay. What about the MMPI-2?
In regard to his MMPI-2, this profile raises the possibility of a major mental illness, either the quality of a schizophrenic disorder or a major affective disorder.
And you looked into that, did you not?
Yes, I did.
But you didn't agree that he was a schizophrenic, did you?
No, although the schizotypal personality disorder is a schizophrenic spectrum disorder.
Sure. Okay.
But he has not been diagnosed by me as schizophrenic, that's correct. And neither did I diagnose him as a major affective disorder.
So by looking at the test, you looked at him for the use that you wanted him, but you arrived at your conclusions independently.
That's correct.
Continue on, please.
The possibility of substance abuse would need clinical exploration. The computerized test interpretation indicated that the respondent was either, quote, likely to be either blatantly psychotic at this time, end quote, or to be subject to, quote, severe breakdown under stress, end quote. Mr. Dahmer's responses to the Rorschach, which is this projective test, the inkblot test, were too few and yielded, quote, limited clinical information, end quote.
Based upon your knowledge and experience in the field of psychiatry, and based upon your knowledge and experience in the field of psychology, for which you said you're not an expert, but you have some training in it, are you satisfied that Mr. Dahmer, as he was presented to you, and prior to the time that you formalized your opinion of January 9th, 1992, were you satisfied that you had all the kind of tests necessary for you to do your job relative to this case?
Yes, I did.
What's your summary, please?
My summary.
On page 10.
Right. Jeffrey Dahmer is a 31-year-old white male charged with a series of 15 murders. He was examined on 4 occasions while incarcerated in Wisconsin, and extensive records were reviewed along with psychological testing. These examinations were performed for the purpose of determining the defendant's mental state at the time of the crimes with which he is charged and to develop treatment recommendations. The extensive record review, psychiatric and psychological examinations reveal a long history of serious ongoing progressive mental illness.
Did Mr. Dahmer draw for you his shrine?
Yes, he did.
I'm going to show you Defendant's Exhibit 31, which has been received in the evidence. That is a shrine that was drawn for Dr. Becker that was received yesterday. And I'd like you to ask you if you can look at that and look at the one he drew for you and tell us whether or not it's substantially the same.
This is, for all practical purposes, the same drawing, the same design. I have the design with me as well.
Oh, man.
Yes, it is. Let me take it out.
Please. Let the record reflect the doctor separating this from his yellow page notes. Doctor, did you have him date this?
I did not have him date it. It was done on 1/1/91. It's from the 3rd interview.
I know it's smart. Your Honor, I've shown this to counsel. Defendant's Exhibit number 32 is the drawing that Dr. Wallstrom has given me that he said is consistent with the one of Dr. Becker, which I think is 27. I move it's receiving the evidence as Defendant's Exhibit number 32 with the understanding that it was drawn by Jeffrey Dahmer, was it, Doctor?
That's correct.
On 1/1/92?
That's correct.
Any objection to its receipt? None, Your Honor. It's received.
Doctor, you have, as a final, I didn't say final, almost final, you have told us today your opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty that each and every time of these homicides, the 15 in question, Jeffrey Dahmer was suffering from a mental disease, to wit, necrophilia, and as a result of that, he lacked substantial capacity to conform his conduct to the requirements of law.
That's correct.
And you make those findings to a reasonable degree of psychiatric certainty.
That's correct.
That's all, thank you.
Cross-examination.
Now, Doctor, there's a portion of Dr. Smale's report that you did not quote. Isn't that true?
That's correct.
When you talked about the Rorschach, is that correct?
I would have to refer to Dr. Smale's report. May I do
Let
that?
me read the paragraph to you that you did not, you only quoted a portion of it.
Okay.
Mr. Dahmer's responses on the Rorschach were quite constricted and thus yielded limited clinical information. You did put that in, didn't you, in your report?
Yes, I did.
Dr. Smale went on to say the following, which you did not include in your report. I ask you, did you? The relatively few responses that he gave suggested a capacity to perceive conventional reality with no clear evidence of major mental illness. Again, the profile is most noteworthy for the limited clinical information available, yet what is evident is not pathognomic of major mental illness. That's what he said in the report, didn't he?
I'm trusting that you're reading that correctly.
Pardon?
I'm trusting you're reading that correctly.
Don't trust me, Doctor. Take a look at it.
Okay.
The last paragraph.
Okay.
You chose to put in the portion of the paragraph that said that limited clinical information, but you chose not to include the part that suggested that the few responses that he gave suggested a capacity to perceive conventional morality with no evidence of major mental illness, no clear evidence of such. You did not include that portion in your report.
That's correct. I did not put Dr. Smale's entire report in my report.
Did you talk with Dr. Smale about it?
I can't recall a specific discussion about that.
All right. Did you talk with him about it?
He reported that the testing revealed a very disturbed profile in general.
All right. Let me ask, Doctor, did you talk with Dr. Smale about it?
About what?
Did you at any time call Dr. Smale to discuss this report?
I did discuss his psychological findings, yes, with him by phone.
By phone, all right.
That's correct.
Did he tell you that he had found the defendant competent at all times in terms of court proceedings?
We didn't discuss that.
You didn't ask him about that?
Well, I'm going to object to any question concerning Mr. Dahmer's competency to stand trial, and Dr. Smale's finding in that regard as being immaterial and irrelevant, and it's a different total basis, so I object to it.
We have a very broad purview in assessing whether he was mentally ill.
Objections overruled.
Did Dr. Smale tell you that he had found him at all times competent to appear in court?
I can't recall.
You made no notes of that?
No, I did not.
In terms of your discussions with Mr. Dahmer about his early childhood,
Yes.
did you find out that it was physically a relatively comfortable childhood?
No, I did not.
What were you told in terms of the home, particularly in the junior high and high school home?
Well, I certainly wouldn't limit it to the junior high and high school home. If you wanted to talk about childhood, basically an unavailable father for the first 5 years of life, a mother who got extremely depressed and was taking sedative medications from 5 or 6 years on.
Was there any evidence of physical
Hospitalized in a
abuse?
mental institution.
Pardon?
Hospitalized in a mental institution.
Did you
She
secure any
was for
records of
mental
that?
illness.
Judge, he's answering the questions being interrupted. He hasn't finished, he said, the doctor's in the process of answering the question.
The question that I put to him was it a relatively comfortable in terms of a physical description, and he chose to make another answer.
My answer is no, it wasn't.
Okay, just a minute, just a minute. Mr. McCann, let's have the next question.
He dwelt during junior high school and high school in a comfortable home, did he not?
He did not describe his home life as comfortable.
I asked about the home. I'm talking about the physical dwelling. Did you talk about the physical dwelling?
He did mention the physical dwelling.
What did he tell you about the physical dwelling?
That there were a lot of woods around his house, and I think he generally described it as a pleasant surrounding.
Tell you it was about 1.25 acres.
Something
Had a
like that.
pond in front of it. Did he tell you that he was ever subjected to sexual abuse by anybody?
No, he did not.
Did he ever tell you that he was subjected to physical abuse by anybody?
Yes, he did.
And by within the home?
No, he didn't.
In other words, neither the father or the mother subjected him to physical abuse of any kind.
He said that they did not.
With respect to the jogger, the incident involving the jogger, did he tell you that he intended to kill that jogger or that he intended to render him unconscious?
He told me that he intended to kill him.
And did you make a note of that in your
Yes.
notes? And with respect to the individual Hicks that he picked up, the hitchhiker, he told you that as he was what did he tell you in connection with that?
That this was a time when his mother had left the household and his father was no longer living there. It was a week interim period. He was all alone, and that he was out driving, not with the intention of picking anyone up, but he suddenly saw a hitchhiker who was not wearing a shirt, by my recollection, drove past him initially and then came back and picked him up.
And did he tell you that he felt he had the power of choice whether to proceed to kill him or not at that time?
Yes, he did.
And he chose to kill him?
Yes, he did.
And that was in what month of what year, if you recollect?
I don't have that right in front of me.
Do you want to check it in your notes?
78, maybe. I have 678.
That would be June of 1978. He tell you after that he went to Ohio State University?
Yes, he did.
And certainly at Ohio State University, one would be exposed to many thousands of handsome young men of desirable physique, would they not?
I would not doubt that statement.
Have you ever visited Columbus and the Ohio State University?
No, I haven't.
It's a major land-grant college in Ohio, and there are many thousands of students attend there. Would you anticipate that Mr. Dahmer would be exposed to people there that he would find attractive?
I would think so.
And yet he chose not to slay any of them. Isn't that true?
There's no report that he did slay anyone.
Well,
He
you
hasn't-
believe he did slay somebody?
I say that there is no report that he did, and he did not say that he did.
My question to you, sir, is do you believe that he slayed someone while he was at Ohio State
I
University?
have no opinion on that.
You have no opinion?
No.
Did he tell you that he lived in a dormitory?
I can't recall.
Yeah, he did, sir. And the fact that would mean that relatively young men of the same age would be quite physically proximate. Wouldn't that be true? In a
Yes.
dormitory. After that, he went into the United States Army. Is that correct?
Yes, he did.
And do you recall when it was that he started in the Army?
When exactly he started in the
Yes.
Army? No, I don't recall a month.
Let us say December of 1978. And he was in the Army for several years, was he not?
About 3.5 years.
Was it 3.5 or 2.5?
I think it's 3.5.
And when did he get out?
I don't have that in front of me.
Pardon?
I don't have that date in front of me.
And during that period of time, he lived in a barracks, is that correct?
Yes.
And most of the persons that would be in the Army at that time, one can safely assume, would be young men at above his age, somewhat below it, but there would be thousands of young men that he would come into contact with, some slightly, some more extensively, while in the Army. Is that correct?
That would be true.
And during that time, he killed no person, did he?
He says he didn't.
He says he didn't. Do you believe he did, or do you believe he didn't?
I have no knowledge that he did.
In forming your opinion, did you assume that he did or did not kill anybody when he was in the military?
I assume that he did not.
During that time, he conformed with the law and exercised control. Is that correct? Control of himself?
He had a serious problem with drinking toward the end, that's for sure.
But he did not kill anyone. Is that correct?
Not that we know about.
Right. Well, and you believe he didn't, don't you?
I have no reason to doubt it.
Right. And that means that he was exercising control over whatever his desires were in that regard, doesn't it?
Yes, it would.
And he said that he relieved some of his sexual needs. Did he tell you how he did that?
Through masturbation, and he discovered some pornography.
He used pornography and masturbation to deal with his sexual needs. Is that correct?
Yes.
And when did he get out of the Army?
I don't have that exact date.
What did he do after he got out of the Army?
He went to Florida.
And where?
I believe Miami.
And along what street did he take up residence?
I do not know.
Have you ever been on Collins Avenue in Miami Beach?
Not that I'm aware of.
Right. He did talk about sleeping on the beach, did he not?
I think he mentioned that.
And one on the beach. You know how long he stayed in Florida?
I think I remember something like 6 months, but I don't know.
It'd be from March of 81 to September of 81 approximately. And during that time, of course, that would include Easter time. If it was a late Easter, it would certainly include the summer of 1981. One would assume that on the beaches of Florida, particularly near a major city like Miami, one would see thousands of attractive young men with their shirts off on the beaches of that city. Would you not assume that, sir?
Yes, I would assume that.
And Mr. Dahmer would have been exposed to seeing those thousands of men. He states he never killed anyone during that time, didn't he?
That's what he states, yes.
Do you believe him or you disbelieve him?
I believe that he also stated that he was struggling against urges during those times.
But he controlled those urges, didn't he?
Yes.
He did not kill anyone. He conformed his conduct to the requirements of the law, didn't he?
Yes.
He then returned to Ohio in September of 1981. Is that correct? Check your notes if you wish. Take your time and check your notes.
Okay. What was the date that you gave?
We're now in the latter part of 1981 when he returned to Ohio from Miami.
Yeah, I may have a wrong date because I have a discharge date in the Army of the 26th in 82, and that may not be right.
It isn't right.
Okay.
Do you indicate when he returned to Ohio? That is from Miami. Do your notes indicate that?
It's not in my report.
Pardon?
That exact date is not in my report.
At any rate, he was, for a period of time, he was at the home, the family home in Ohio, Bath, Ohio. Is
Yes.
that correct? Mm-hmm. During that time, did he kill anybody?
No, he didn't.
And you believe he did not. Is that correct?
I'm assuming that he did not.
And when did he go to Milwaukee, or particularly to West Allis, Wisconsin?
I don't have that exact date in front of me.
When do you think it was, approximately?
82.
In late of 1981, early 1982, took up residence with his grandmother. Is that correct? In West Allis? Mm-hmm. And then for a period from then until 1987, did not kill anybody, did he? For that period of time, from late December of 1981 to November of 1987.
That's correct.
That's almost a period of 6 solid years, is it not?
That would be yes.
And if one were to go back from the time he enlisted in the Army in December of 78 until November of 87, we're talking about almost 9 full years, aren't we?
Yes.
During that time, you say, did he have any fantasies about killing people?
Yes.
And during that time, he handled all those fantasies and controlled them, did he not?
He struggled to resist and was successful.
So just so you understand, we're talking about desire, aren't we? About desire to have sex, first with an unconscious person, is that correct?
We're talking about thoughts about having necrophilic activity.
Right. And tell us what his fantasy was. Would you tell us what he described? Did it change from the time of Hicks until the time of 1987? Did he tell you whether it changed or not?
No. I mean, it did not change.
What was it? What was the fantasy? Would you tell the jury what this fantasy was?
The fantasy was an attractive male of a certain physique that would not leave him. He wished to control that individual. He wished to have sex with that individual.
That was it?
He wished to keep that individual with him. He did not believe that that individual could ever stay, so he felt that killing was the only way to keep that individual.
Did he talk about having that individual unconscious?
He talked about deriving pleasure at times from having an unconscious victim.
Did he talk about how we would kill that person?
Are you talking now about how he actually did or how he
No,
fantasized?
what the fantasy said.
No.
Didn't you ask him what the fantasy says about killing?
No, I didn't.
That would seem to me to be a very profoundly important question. You knew that he had killed 17 men when you met him, and he was talking about a fantasy. Didn't you ask him, what does your fantasy say about the killing?
I think I answered the question.
You didn't ask him that question?
I know what he did,
I'm asking you what the fantasy was.
and I answered the question.
The answer is you didn't ask him.
That's correct.
Did he tell you how he was going to kill them in any way? What the fantasy was, how he would kill them?
No, he did not.
And you never asked him.
That's correct.
For a period from December of 1981, when he arrived in West Allis, to November of 1987, he went through one period where he came under the influence of his grandmother, and to a good extent, according to his description, sought the straight and narrow life. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Did he talk to you about that?
Yes, he did.
He told you that he started, under the grandmother's influence, reading the Bible, started to go to church. Is that correct?
Yes.
Cut back on his drinking. Maybe he gave up drinking. Do you recall whether he said he
He
gave it
said
up?
he gave it up for a while.
He gave it up. And during that time, he did not become, he said he cut back substantially on masturbating. Is that correct?
Yes.
And during that time, he committed no offenses, at least particularly under the grandmother's influence. Is that true?
During that period of time, he did not commit any offenses.
And then there came a period of time where he started to slip back into, or started to go down to porn shops, pornography shops, and started to visit bathhouses. Is that correct?
Yes, that attempt to repress himself at his grandmother's did not last.
Do you recall when it was that he said when he started to backslide into other activities?
Yes, I do.
When was that?
He said he was sitting in a library and that someone dropped a note into his lap saying that, meet me down in the basement for a blowjob. And he did not do that, but that stimulated him and started him thinking about sexual thoughts again.
And the sexual thoughts create what is attractive to him because of the desire for the dead body. It creates a sexual desire, does it not?
That's what he said.
Yeah. And did you believe him?
Yes.
And the sexual desire is sexual desire different from one person to another? The object of it certainly is, but if a person feels a sexual interest, if you see a person there that you're attracted to, you get sexually excited about it, you may experience some tumescence in your portions of your body, that's how a normal person is sexually excited. Is that true?
Sexual arousal occurs all the time, sure.
And whether the object is an unconscious man or the object is a conscious, attractive woman, the sexual phenomenon, the attraction is basically the same. Not the object that's attracted, but the reaction to the person that's being attracted is about the same, is it not?
You're saying that they get aroused?
Yes.
Yes.
And sexual desire for a woman and sexual desire for an unconscious man are basically sexual desire. Isn't that true?
They are sexual desire.
There isn't anything absolutely unique about Mr. Dahmer's sexual desire, except that the object of it was an unconscious man.
What was a dead man?
Which did he say he preferred, live or dead?
He said that he preferred having sex with the insides of the bodies. That was a 10 out of 10. That's what he told me.
Did he tell you whether he preferred live men?
He did not.
What did he say he preferred? The sex with the inside of the body?
Yes.
And what was the second choice?
There was a tie with a dead body sex, other types of sex with a dead body or an unconscious body.
And those, he said, were his first choices.
No, he said he got the greatest sexual stimulation from having sex with the insides of a dead body.
And he told you that when? In December or early January? When did he tell you that?
He told it to me during one of my interviews. I can
You know when, what date that was?
Not unless I refer to my notes.
Take a minute and check.
Sure. That was on January 4th, 1992.
And he told you that was his first choice.
Yes.
What did he tell you was his second choice?
He said that those were equally sexually exciting, the drugged or dead male.
They were equally sexually exciting. A live, drugged man or a dead man?
But not an opened up man.
That would be first.
Yes.
So his second and third choices would be equal. An unconscious live man or a dead man. Is that correct?
That's what he said.
So whether you call it a tie or what is second choice, there were two for the second choice. Is that correct?
That would be two, yeah.
Now in terms of at least it appears in 85 and 86, he started to go to bathhouses. Is that correct?
That's right.
And some men wanted to have anal sex with him, and he didn't want that. Is that correct? Is that what his complaint was?
That was one of his complaints.
And while he did not want it have done to him, he was willing to drug someone else and perform anal sex on that individual, wasn't he?
That's true.
That seems to me like a very selfish way to operate. Would you see it that way too?
I think that he wanted the control. I think he couldn't tolerate the possibility that if he said that he didn't want anal sex, that they would leave him.
Let me repeat my question. My question was that it was a very selfish way to operate, wasn't it?
Well, I think it was indicative of a mental disorder.
And strong sexual desire.
Right.
He wanted to have, the purpose was the sexual pleasure he was going to derive from it, was it not?
That was a purpose.
And he proceeded to do that a number of times in bathhouses in this city, did he not?
Yes.
And then did he tell you he was put out of the bathhouses for that?
I think I recall him saying that, yeah.
There's no question he knew it was wrong what he was doing. Isn't that true?
I think that that's a fair assessment, that he knew that that was not permitted or right.
Did he tell you that he lied to get the drugs? That he went to a physician and lied to get the drugs that he would use on these men?
He said that he had gone into physicians with complaints of sleep disturbance.
And that wasn't true, was it?
He did take the medications on occasion for sleep disturbance.
Doctor, I put it to you on your oath, did he tell you that his main purpose in going to the doctors was to get sleeping pills to drug men in bathhouses?
He said that he got sleeping pills on numerous occasions for the purpose of drugging males.
And that was his main purpose, wasn't it? In going to get those to those doctors was to get drugs to drug people in bathhouses and later on in hotels. Isn't that true?
That's correct.
And after he was put out of the bathhouse, he started to go to several hotels, did he not? Did he tell you he went to several local hotels? Did he mention the Wisconsin and the Ambassador hotels?
He mentioned the Ambassador.
And did he tell you how many people he took to those hotels and drugged in those hotels and had sex with?
I can't recall.
There came a time in November that he went with a man named, we've later learned was named Stephen Twomey, is that correct?
Yes.
And did he tell you how he prepared to bring Mr. Tuomi to that hotel room?
He said that he planned to go with him for some, what he called frequently light sex, that drugging would be involved.
Did he tell you how he prepared for that? Did he tell you that he got the pills and ground them at the Ambassador Hotel before he went out and looked for a man such as Tuomi?
He didn't tell me that.
Did you ask him?
No.
He returned with Tuomi and he drugged Tuomi then, did he not?
That's what he said he did.
And he woke up, he went, doesn't know precisely sure what happened, but he woke up and Tuomi was dead in the bed with him, is that correct?
He said he was laying on top of Tuomi and that he
Tuomi
was
appeared to
dead.
be beaten in some fashion and Dahmer's arms appeared to have been black and blue.
That's correct.
Beyond that, he could not tell you what happened, is that correct?
That's
He took
correct.
Tuomi to his grandmother's house and not long, several days thereafter, dismembered him, is that correct?
Yes.
Did he tell you, did he enjoy dismembering or was he doing that to get rid of the body?
He said that he did not enjoy the dismembering.
He did not have a car available to him, did he?
No, he did not.
And it was necessary, he didn't want to leave the body in the Ambassador Hotel. That would have cast suspicion on him, wouldn't it?
It certainly could have.
So he got a suitcase and brought it to the grandmother's house.
Yes.
And then he got rid of it and actually watched the garbage men pick up the trash with Tuomi's body in it. Would that be accurate?
He said he disposed of the body in the trash on the day that he knew the garbage was being picked up.
Did he tell you that he triple bagged the garbage?
Yes.
Did he tell you that in order to get rid of the large bones, he wrapped them in a sheet and pounded the bones with a sledgehammer?
Yes.
And in that fashion, he got rid of the flesh and bones of Stephen Tuomi, is that correct?
That's correct.
And he did not have a car, didn't want to leave the body in Grandma's driveway, obviously, and the dismembering and getting rid of the body was a way to get rid of the evidence, was it not?
Yes.
Then he says, after he said to a number of people, after the Ambassador Hotel, he stopped struggling or stopped making an effort with respect to the fantasy. Did he say some type of language to you along that line?
He felt he was no longer able to resist it.
So he ceased resisting, is that correct?
He no longer resisted.
And anybody that ceased resisting their sexual urges is going to have some problems, aren't they? Whether you like women, whether you like men, if you cease resisting your sexual urges, you're going to have some problems in life, aren't you?
Well, he certainly does.
And then he consciously set out to get the man, which resulted in the death of Mr. Dockstader. Is that correct?
That's correct.
He is no longer struggling or resisting against anyone. He has now become a hunter, has he not?
He describes a process whereby he plans to capture individuals for sexual purposes.
And he even gets the drugs and grinds the drugs a number of the times and gets it ready before he goes out to get them, doesn't he?
Yes.
And he drinks first, then too. He drinks, does he not?
He does drink, although he says not during the week when he's having the fantasies about doing it.
In other words, he fantasizes during the week about it. But he's got to work during the week, so he doesn't go out on weeknights. He only goes out on weekend nights when he doesn't have to work. Would that be accurate?
Yes.
So despite having the fantasy on work days, he neither drinks nor does he act on the fantasy because he's got to go to work.
Well, he does act insofar as he plans.
He plans it and has the drugs. If he needs to go out, he gets the drugs and lays his plans how he's going to get someone. Is that correct?
In a general way.
And then he goes out, doesn't have a car, but he goes out to a gay bar area looking for whom he will attempt to induce back to come to the house, isn't it? Isn't that what he does?
Yes.
And he waits till the time that the bar closing time. He identifies who he wants to select and waits till bar closing time to go up to that person. Wasn't that basically his procedure?
Yes.
And then he goes out, doesn't have a car, but he goes out to a gay bar area looking for whom he will attempt to induce back to come to the house, isn't it? Isn't that what he does?
Yes.
And he waits till the bar closing time to go up to that person. Wasn't that basically his procedure?
He said he would approach people at bar closings, although he met some of the people in other areas on the street and so forth.
I assume it's the same in Chicago as it is in Milwaukee. At bar closing time, you turn on the lights, all right, everybody out. And people go out, some of them mill on the street, and people are talking, and cars are pulling up, and things like that. Is that how things go in Chicago?
Well, I think it depends which bar.
At any rate,
It could happen.
all right, at any rate, it's at that point that he would go up and make his pitch, would he not?
That's when he would talk to people about coming back to his apartment with him.
And particularly with Dockstader, he either rode, did he take a bus out or a cab out with Mr. Dockstader?
I don't recall.
In any event, whenever he took a cab and the time, did you go through each of the slayings with him?
Yes.
Would you think it professional not to go through each of the slayings with him? Would you attempt to provide a formal analysis to this court of Mr. Dahmer without going through each slaying?
I thought it was important to go through each slaying.
And you would think less of a professional who didn't go through each slaying in a 15-count slaying. Would that be true?
I think that if someone was describing a self-serving, aberrant pattern that they said was unchanged on the next victim or the next few victims, that the degree of depth wouldn't be the same as if it was very different in every case, or if there was just one case or two cases.
Well, there were differences in each of these cases, weren't there? In many of them.
And
Did he
there was-
strangle each man to death with his hands?
No.
Did he used a strap in some cases, did he not?
Yes.
About how many, do you recollect?
No.
Did he use another weapon on at least one occasion?
Yes.
And what was that?
A knife.
And on whom did he do that?
I don't recall.
And he claimed several died afterwards that he didn't intend to kill, but by virtue of what he did to them. Do you recall that?
I didn't hear the question.
He's claimed that several other men died, not by his intentional act of killing, but by virtue of something he did to them.
That's correct.
So there wasn't, you can't say, look at these and say there's a static pattern of what he did in these incidences, is there?
There are different patterns.
And a person who is a careful professional would go through each slaying to see how close he adhered to a pattern or didn't he. Would that be accurate?
Well, I can speak for what I did.
Did you do that in each case?
Yes.
And that's what you've been trained to do, is it not true?
Yes.
With respect to Mr. Dockstader, if he took the bus out, they went to the home, he had some sex with them, got the drug involved either before or after the sex, and eventually strangled him to death. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was Mr. Dockstader a 15-year-old boy?
I don't have his age right in front of me.
And then he went out several months later and made contact with a man named Richard Guerrero, did he not?
Yes, he did.
And was that also at a downtown tavern or club, at least on the near south side?
Check that. He met him at a place called the 219 Club.
And what did he do with him?
Well, he killed him.
Did he drug him? Did you indicate how he got home with him?
Cab.
Got home by cab. Did he tell you why he didn't have a car? Did you ask him about a car?
I think he said he had never had a car.
Didn't have what?
I think he said he had never had a car.
Is there any discussion by you with him about how he would target particular victims, whether they had cars or not?
No, there wasn't.
Did you know, sir, did you learn from him that he always targeted men that didn't have a car, or at least didn't have a car that was operating? Did you know that?
I subsequently learned that that's the case. In one case, someone was trying to start a car, apparently.
You subsequently learned that. Did you learn that from the defendant?
I either learned it in reading through some of these voluminous records or my notes. I'm not sure where I learned it.
Did you learn that, in fact, from something that was you secured through one of the other psychiatrists prepared for by the state? Do you recall if that's where you first saw that? Did you get the reports of Dr. Fosdell and Dr. Dietz?
Yes.
And up to that time, had you realized that the defendant always cunningly took someone, a victim, that didn't have a car or didn't have a car that was operating?
I don't know when I learned it.
Did he tell you that during the time, 3 or 4 times that you spoke with him?
I don't recall that ever coming up.
It shows a great deal of cunning, does it not? So that there would be, as he would told one of our psychiatrists, so that there wouldn't be a car around for the police to find.
Okay.
Does that suggest cunning to you?
It does suggest cunning.
And does his failure to tell you that suggest that he wasn't entirely candid with you?
No, it may suggest my failure to ask him the question.
Would that be due to your inexperience, do you think?
No, I don't.
If his first preference was sex with the inside of bodies, you did not mention that in your report, did you?
No, I didn't.
Did you deliberately choose not to mention that?
No.
Did you fail to mention, did you think it unimportant, what his choice was?
Well, I have over 75 pages of notes. It's not an exact, my report is not an exact transcript of what transpired. You got my notes, it's in my notes, I read from you from my notes.
You did not put that within your notes, however.
It is in my notes.
No, but you didn't put that within your report, did you?
No, I didn't.
If he preferred the insides of dead bodies, he nevertheless preferred to keep people alive by making them zombies, did he not?
He talked at one point about planning and carrying that out.
And he told you that he didn't want them to die. He wanted them around. Your report says that. He wants them around. That's right out of your report, isn't it?
That's the point he got to at victim number, at Earl Lindsay.
And did you ask him, Mr. Dahmer, if your first choice is the insides of persons you've slit open, why is it then that you chose to try to keep them alive as zombies? Did you put such a question to him?
No, I didn't.
Did the two seem inconsistent somewhat to you?
Well, he derived pleasure from a live drugged body that was incapacitated, as well as deriving pleasure from a dead body. 8 out of 10, 10 out of 10 is still, it's still pleasure. And he didn't like killing, and he wanted to keep them alive and in a zombie state.
And when he had to kill, he claimed at least that he was aversive to that he didn't enjoy killing.
That's correct.
And that did he tell you he would have to drink at one particular instance, 2 instances he speaks about particularly getting drinks before he could kill someone. Did he tell you that?
He talked about not liking it and drinking at times to overcome that dislike.
Did he tell you particularly with respect to Ernest Miller? That's the man that he stabbed, isn't it? Would you look that up, Ernest Miller, because I'm going to ask you several questions about that.
Okay, why don't, it's about time we should take a break. Why don't we take a break?
Non-normative sexual preoccupations may be mild and that they are fantasies and that they're not acted upon. They may cause some distress or may be acted on occasionally. That would more classify them as a mild type of disorder. They may be acted on frequently or exclusively and take on a drive or obsession to participate in this, maybe exclusively, maybe not, and that would be the most severe form of the illness.
Is there a number attached to the relative significance of where these stressors are?
It's not a number. It's more mild, moderate, and severe. There is a scale that I did refer to in my report that talks about a global assessment of functioning, and I don't know if you're referring to.
No, that's okay. I would like to state to the severity of the psychosocial stressors in Mr. Dahmer. Did you arrive in opinion to a reasonable degree of psychiatric certainty as to where he would fit in the scale of the severity of these stressors?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
That he was suffering from extreme stressors, and those were that he had serious chronic mental illness in himself.
Now, you said something about a global assessment of functioning. Is that part of the DSM-3R?
Yes, it is.
That concept? What is
Yes.
that? What do psychiatrists use that for?
Well, they diagnosed that on axis 5, which is the final, the fifth axis, and that they use that to look at the person's overall level of mental functioning. A score of 1 would be the worst possible score you could get. The number 90 would indicate a level of mental health that most of us would hope to achieve.
Okay, and where would you find Mr. Dahmer within 1 to 90?
I found him to be in the lowest range. I coded him from 1 to 10, which is a scale, would be the lowest possible score range.
What did you see that led you to conclude that? Is this done to a reasonable degree of psychiatric certainty?
Yes, it is.
Tell us what happened that caused you to do that scoring as you saw it, Mr. Dahmer.
Well, I saw in him a present danger, a persistent danger of severely hurting or killing others, and some danger of hurting himself. There was behavior that was considerably influenced by delusions, along with extreme impairment in interpersonal relationships.
Now, you mentioned that the defendant had an underlying personality structure. You used the word extremely primitive.
Yes.
Tell us what you mean by that, please.
Well, the borderline personality, for example, is considered to be can be considered to be a level of personality development. It contains some of the most serious symptoms that cause either distress or interference with our relationships with others.
What, if anything, does this have to do with perhaps substance abuse, if anything?
Well, one important thing is that it's one of the criteria in the DSM-3 is impulsiveness. And they give several examples in the DSM-3R of examples of impulsiveness. Sexual, spending, substance abuse, overeating, external impulsive forms of self-soothing or satisfaction.
What's it do to mood? Affect mood?
Yes, mood can be very unstable and intense, where people have difficulty handling their anger.
This schizotypical, how do you say this? Schizotypal? Hey.
Schizotypal.
Schizotypal and borderline personality disorder, you also indicate that within that there's it has something to do with real or imagined abandonment. Would you express us what you meant by that, please?
Yeah, that is actually in the borderline personality disorder. And these people are some of the most difficult to treat in psychiatric practice. I just want to add that books, seminars, and lectures are given at every major association, American Psychiatric Association convention, on how to treat these patients, and case examples are given. They have the feeling of abandonment, it's thought to due to their early developmental history, and they feel that even if abandonment is not really being happening to them, that it is. So they have frantic attempts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. And in this case, it's the most extreme example of those kind of frantic attempts.
And how so?
Well, he killed to keep people there.
Okay. Judge, I think I'm just going to ask this next question. I think it'll be a good time to break then, because this is the last one concerning the conceptual psychiatric things we're talking about. You indicated that you found, because of Jeffrey Dahmer's personal power center that you've described, this temple and what he was going to gain from it,
Yes.
some psychotic disorder not otherwise specified. Why is that called not otherwise specified?
It's called not otherwise specified because it is specified if it's a definite diagnosis of schizophrenia. That's a psychotic disorder with the
No, that's specified.
That's specified. Non-bizarre delusions are called delusional disorders, and they're specified. What we don't have a category for is someone that has bizarre delusions like this without hallucinations, without meeting other criteria for unorganic or non-organic psychosis. And I do want to add that it is not just the power center itself that leads me to the psychotic, not otherwise specified diagnosis. There are other examples of delusional psychotic behavior.
Tell us what they are.
Those are not only the belief, but the attempt to make zombies out of individuals. That is a bizarre, grandiose delusion that he could actually do a crude brain operation that would make people forget their memory and identity, and that they had to leave him, and that he went out one after another, even though these were failing, and continued to try and do such a delusional type of activity.
Is there anything else?
The other part would be the cannibalism. That is also a very bizarre delusion, in that actually storing and packaging parts of these poor individuals that they were going to become part of him.
Now, what you said...
Literally and figuratively.
Literally and figuratively.
Yes.
What you said was, when there's psychotic disorder, like schizophrenia, you know what it is and it fits into a certain definition.
Yes.
And when there's delusional behavior, that's specified also, because it fits into a clear-cut category. Is that right?
The delusional disorder in the DSM-3R, yes.
But when there are these things, such as you've told us about Jeffrey Dahmer, and you try and look out where it fits, you don't find a clear-cut definition, so you hook it into the psychotic disorder, but you say it's just not specified, so that I can put it into exact terminology.
That's what the DSM-3R tells us to do.
Okay. So in other words, there are some that are clearly defined. If you hear that a person has 7 of these things, it'll fit into this. 6 of those, it'll fit into that. But when he
Yes.
has a whole bunch of things and it doesn't fit in anything, it's called not otherwise specified.
That's a fair way of describing it.
Psychiatry hasn't figured out what to call the things that he was doing that you said are psychotic, so therefore you include those in the non-otherwise specified.
They're less common and less typical.
This would be a good time for us to break here. Was the mental disease that Jeffrey Dahmer had been suffering from, as you have classified it, such that it impaired the mind, whether enduring or transitory, and whether or not it substantially affected the mental or emotional processes of Mr. Dahmer at the time of each and every one of these offenses?
It did, yes.
And
It
was
affected his mind in an enduring way ever since childhood or adolescence, and it would affect him in transitory ways as well when he would regress and actually commit the acts.
So during the time of the commission of each and one of these acts, you've told us he suffered from a mental disease that did substantially affect his mental or emotional processes.
That's correct.
And that's made to a reasonable degree of psychiatric certainty.
Yes, it is.
All right. Now, you said, can you tell us whether or not the defendant had paraphilic obsessions, did he not?
Yes, he did.
Can you tell us whether or not, as he continued along in his life, such became more or less powerful as he went along on his road to the day he was arrested?
They became more powerful. It's at that time that he developed a disorder that would qualify him as being psychotic.
All right, let me ask you this. You said that besides the necrophilia, which you classified as a mental disease in and of itself, were there other impairments of the mind present other than necrophilia at some or all of the times when Mr. Dahmer was involved in these necrophilic acts?
Yes, there were.
And tell us what they were, and then we'll ask you what you're basing your opinion on.
Okay. He suffered from alcohol dependence, which was mild and varied with time. There were times where he was not drinking. There were times when he was drinking more heavily. He, at a point in this process, when he was becoming psychotic, and that is specifically when he had ideas about developing the bizarre idea of developing a power center.
Well, what was this power center he was telling you about that caused you to make the statement that he was becoming psychotic?
Well, that was a bizarre delusion that he thought that he could take the skulls and the bones of victims and create a power center in which he would be able to get special powers by drawing on the energy from these unfortunate individuals.
Well, what was that? What does that mean? What is, in psychiatric terms, what is that demonstrative of?
It's demonstrative of a bizarre delusion. It has no basis in reality and shows a distortion in his thought process. He believed, for example, that he could get financial gain. I had asked him about that, and he thought he could get success in the real estate market by having this power center. And I asked how that was, and he thought that this somehow magically would give him financial success, and would also give him social success, but not in the way we usually think of it, but social success in being able to control people better.
And as a psychiatrist, those kind of thoughts are classified as what, and what do they relate to you as a psychiatrist?
They relate to me that he's engaging in delusional thinking.
People who are into delusional thinking, what effect does delusional thinking have? I mean, what is it, delusional thinking?
Delusional thinking is a type of thinking where you develop fixed false beliefs that are outside of what we would consider the normal reality. You get a special personal interpretation of what reality is.
What about the person who every week plays the lottery thinking he's going to become a millionaire and live gloriously the rest of his life? Is that delusional thinking?
Well, that's hopeful thinking. There is a chance of winning the lottery. It's small, but there is a finite chance. It's not delusional to think that you could win. If you don't play, you can't win.
So if there's no basis in reality, it's delusional.
Yes.
And that's what you saw in Jeffrey Dahmer?
Yes, I did.
Was he always into delusional thinking, or was it?
No, that came on gradually. He began at a certain point to save the skulls with the purpose of making this temple. He drew a picture of the temple. He talked about what the temple would do for him.
Tell us whether or not, based upon your interviews and all the things that you did, if you came up with any other psychiatric opinions relative to Jeffrey Dahmer's personality.
Yes, I did. The defendant's personality structure, his underlying way of looking at the world and himself is very primitive. It's diagnosed and meets the criteria for DSM-3 for schizotypal and borderline personality
Tell us
disorders.
what that means.
That means that he has long-standing underlying disturbances in how he looks at himself and his relationships with other people. So problems with his self-image, the presence of bizarre ideas and preoccupations, impulsiveness, mood instability, frustration, intolerance. One of the hallmarks of borderline personality is a frantic attempt to avoid real or imagined abandonment, and that is something that was a mental process with him on every occasion.
Standing alone, is that a mental disease?
It can reach psychotic proportions. Those are two personality disorders that can reach psychotic proportions. They are the most serious in that sense.
So it can be a mental disease, staying alone, it may not be.
Right.
That takes an investigator like yourself to at least make an estimate as to whether or not you feel it's reached that proportion.
That's correct.
Tell us the other type of personality disorder that you talked about. I think you call it borderline.
The borderline personality is the disturbance in self-image and relationships with others. He has, since childhood, had a disturbance in self-image. He doesn't view himself as a very worthy individual. He can't imagine himself actually having an ongoing adult relationship with someone. So he tries to solve a problem of still needing that by some of these horrible activities.
Tell us if you found any other related physical conditions within the investigation that a psychiatrist may do in a case such as this, so bring it to our attention if there were any.
The additional, if I've not mentioned, I would have to mention now psychotic disorder not otherwise specified. I believe I did touch on that
I think you did in reference to the temple.
Yes.
And I'll get into when that started creeping up, but
Okay.
I think you did mention that.
All right.
What about any other physical conditions?
He had a period of unconsciousness during one of these attacks upon him that lasted greater than an hour, but he did not report any known deficits as a result. He was treated for a minor skin condition in the jail. There aren't any other known medical conditions.
As a doctor of psychiatry and as a person who has been working even in the manner and form in which you have, is there a way within the concept of the DSM-3R to put these types of things into a category of how severe, how not severe, what scale there would be? Is there such a thing?
Yes, there is.
Tell us how that works.